All right, welcome to today's edition of the Post-Gazette Live. Obviously, we do this live every single day. We talk about your Pittsburgh Steelers. We talk about the NFL. We talk about a whole lot of other things. And, of course, this week we will at some point also be talking about the fact that the college football playoff is here, at least the Final Four is, and, of course, that means that we will obviously be very interested in at least one of the games, right? Notre Dame, Penn State, but the other game too, because it is a national semifinal. So we've got a lot to get to, but of course, we will always, as usual, start with the Steelers. A little bit of news today. Mason McCormick. Looks like Mason McCormick is going to try and play. Obviously, he's got a cast on his hand. I think that for the most part, that's the only injury that really is even registering at all. And I think the other part of it is, if you think about Dante Jackson, it sounds like he doesn't even have an injury designation at this point. So there's that. I think the Steelers are actually really pretty healthy. I mean, this probably, I would say, I'd have to go back, and obviously, you know, there could be somebody that could correct me and say, well, you're wrong, but this is probably the healthiest they've been going into the playoffs in a while, right? They've got their quarterback intact. They have their running backs intact. They have their offensive line, for the most part, intact. You know, their defense is not really missing anyone of significance. At the end of the day, it sounds like Mason McCormick is the only guy that may not be able to play, but it sounds like he's going to play. You know, a kid, he's obviously been someone we've talked about a lot as being one of these guys where it's, well, you know, he's a Steeler. And if he's really legitimately a Steeler, that's good. But to me, I look at it like this and say, if that's a Steeler, that if he's got that, you know, DNA in his blood, he's going to play. I mean, he's going to find a way to play. So I think that's really what, you know, the news of the day is that the Steelers really are very, very healthy going into this. There's not a whole lot of, you know, built-in excuse for why they shouldn't be able to win this game. You know, usually every year we come up with, or at least there's people that want to come up with all of these reasons why they lose a game. Well, there's no reason why they can't win this game, because at the end of the day, they're healthy. They're not missing anybody of significance. They're not missing anybody, you know, that's going to change the way they have to play. Everybody is healthy, and that includes, like I said, Dante Jackson, who is back at practice today, a full participant. And if you have him as a full participant, you have your entire defense intact. And like I said, your entire offense, for the most part, is intact. I mean, it's pretty much the same as it's been. And you've got both of your quarterbacks are at your disposal. And that's something we're going to talk about a little bit later in this week, too, is should they use both quarterbacks? Obviously, it seems like they've got a weapon in Justin Fields that they didn't do a great job this year of using and changing pace with and that kind of stuff. And especially now, you know, if you look at what the weather looks like it's going to be, if you look at what the weather's going to be on Saturday in Baltimore, it looks like it's going to be a really snowy day. And so to me, when I look at that, I say that you should be able to run the ball, and you should want to run the ball. And if you're going to do that, then you use Justin Fields. Now, I'm going to address this because it is something that everyone is talking about. There's a lot of discussion about it. I think it was it Peter King that threw out there that, you know, the Steelers should consider Aaron Rodgers. I can think of no worse idea than the Steelers going and getting Aaron Rodgers. I mean, first of all, how much does he really have left in the tank? Second of all, if you sign him, you're basically bringing a guy into your locker room who obviously has been a little bit hard to deal with. Now, there's some people that say, well, Mike Tomlin is a guy who is a player's coach and people want to play for him. And so therefore, if, you know, he comes to the Steelers, and also they have the system where they're going to run the ball and control the clock and all that other good stuff. It makes no sense at all. It doesn't make it makes no sense for the Steelers to go get Aaron Rodgers next year. I think he'll be 40, 41 years old, whatever he'll be. He's, still gimpy leg guy. I mean, what are we talking about here? It does go to show you, and here's where you read between the lines, right? Whenever a story like this hits somebody like Peter King or Jay Glazier or one of Schefter, one of these guys, here's what I'll tell you. It probably does suggest that the Steelers have let it known that they're probably not going to re-sign Russell Wilson. Because all of these names are popping up, right? Every one of these quarterbacks, somehow or some way, they continue to do this thing where they attach it to the Steelers. If that's the case, it's because they know that the Steelers are probably not going to re-sign Russell Wilson. And so they might bring in a guy like, Aaron Rodgers, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. To me, if you're going to do that, you might as well stick with Russell Wilson. He already knows the system. He already knows what you're going to expect from him. He's already familiar with the other guys in that locker room, and they seem to like him or whatever. Why go sign Aaron Rodgers? Aaron Rodgers might have an opportunity to play for another year somewhere. I'll be honest with you, I think one of the things that you could do with him is, if you're the Jets, keep him for another year and say, listen, we're going to make our offense better. We're going to run the ball better, and we're going to try and utilize what you do, but we're also going to draft a quarterback that you can mentor for a year. That would be the most sense with a guy like Aaron Rodgers. But the fact that all these national guys seem to be connecting quarterbacks with the Steelers suggests to me that the Steelers are probably telling people that they're not likely to sign Russell Wilson back. Now, that could change. He goes down to Baltimore. They win the game down there. Then they would go where? To Buffalo probably. They'd go to Kansas City probably, right? And say they go to Kansas City and they play really well and just lose a tough game. Steelers look at his body of work in the playoffs and say, boy, we could win with this guy. Maybe they sign him again. But again, I think the reason that you see these kind of rumors pop up with respect to a guy like Aaron Rodgers and to connect him to the Steelers is because at the end of the day, that would basically mean the Steelers are letting it be known to some of their favored people in the national media. They're letting it be known, they're leaking it, that they're probably not going to sign Russell Wilson. And so, to me, I would basically say this. It's hilarious. Could the Steelers, this is what Peter King writes, just so you know what we're talking about. Could the Steelers pursue the veteran quarterback if he becomes available? Cam Hayward, TJ Watt. I've got guys on defense with their expiration dates not long in the future. Peter King said, I would want to come in and try and get a quarterback who could make me competitive with Baltimore, Cincinnati in 2025. And that guy to me would be Aaron Rodgers. Okay. First of all, if anybody really believes that Aaron Rodgers puts the Steelers in a category where at quarterback they're competitive with the Bengals and the Ravens, then I think you're probably kidding yourself. But here's the other thing, and I think this is probably the most important thing about all of this stuff here. If you look at Aaron Rodgers, if you look at the Steelers, they split with the Baltimore, they split with Cincinnati with Russell Wilson. They've done the equivalent of trying to kick the can down the road until they can figure out what they really want to do long-term at quarterback. To me, if I'm the Steelers, the first thing I do is I lock up Justin Fields. I give him maybe a 2-year deal with a bunch of incentives that if he becomes a starter, you know what I mean, he can make a lot of money. But, Justin Fields is still young enough that if over the next 2 years he really takes, hold of the starting quarterback job and becomes that guy, guess what? Then all of a sudden you've got a young guy that you can, then sign for another 4 or 5, 6 years or whatever, and your quarterback position would be set for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. But the second thing you need to do probably it's at that point is figure out what you're going to do long term. If Justin Fields is one part of the equation, what's the other? Is it trading up and trying to get one of the quarterbacks? I would tell you, I don't think this is the draft that you want to do that, because I don't know if I am really in love with just about any of the top quarterbacks in the draft. The Steelers moving up to try and go get a draft, and I think that's the key. That's the key there. You want to make sure that the guys you're going to get, if you're going to move up, are guys that you really feel good about. In terms of I'll tell you, I'll pull it up right here in terms of where you're going to take these guys. I mean, I'll give you a great example. Deion Sanders kid, I think that he might be okay in the NFL. I also could see where he could be a tremendous bust. Right? Back has got a lot of his arm. I mean, he's got a lot of injury issues. I'm not sure I'm in love with him either. Cam Ward, he's 6'2", played pretty well for Miami this year. Are you ready to give the keys to the kingdom to a guy like Cam Ward? One. I don't know if I'm going to draft. I don't know if I'm going to spend the draft capital to move up to go get one of the, to go get him. So on this little mock draft, okay, Quinn Ewers, who might not even go into the draft. Jalen Milroe from Alabama. Do you know who he Howard guy. Are you trading up for Shedeur Sanders? I mean, that kind of think about how much trade up to go from like 19 to 11 or whatever it was, to 19 to 12 or whatever it was to go to get Broderick Jones. Now talk about going, from 1920 to 2 or 1. What's that going to look like? Is Shedeur Sanders worth that to you? Is Cam Ward worth that to you? I mean, those two guys probably are going to be the guys that are off the board pretty early in the draft. But, if you're talking about maybe waiting until a guy drops to you, I don't know. Who did I say was number 3 on this list? Oh, Quinn Ewers. No. Jalen Milroe. No, I wouldn't take either of those guys. I would sign them if they were still available as undrafted free agents. Maybe. But like I said, I'm looking at the list, and I'm like, boy, I'm not really sure any of these guys. So my point is, I don't know that you're getting your guy of the future. Okay, I don't know that you're getting your guy of the future in this draft. And if that's the case, then again, there's probably 2 issues. There's probably two ways to go. As I said, sign Justin Fields and Russell Wilson for another year. Or better yet, sign Justin Fields and say, we're going to sign you for a 2-year deal. The second year will be a club option. There's going to be a zillion incentives built into this thing. And you're going to be the guy that we're going to go into next season as our starter, and then go sign a veteran guy as your backup. And be committed to Justin Fields. And be committed to the idea of, you know what? We might take a little bit of a step back, gasp, go 8-9 and not have a non-losing season. But if he develops into a legitimate starting quarterback with his skill set, we will have won in the long run. You could do that. I wouldn't hate that idea, to be honest, because I hate most of the quarterbacks that will be available in the draft, and I don't think you're trading up for any of those guys. Honestly, I think they all stink. Now, I shouldn't say stink, but, I was talking with somebody the other day about this. For all the discussion about the Kenny Pickett, quarterback draft, if you think about it, the guy out of that entire, heap was probably it's worth anything is Brock Purdy, and he was the last guy taken in the draft that year. But all of those guys, Pickett, I know everybody's excited because he had a good game or something a few weeks ago. Pickett's looks to me like he'll be a guy who'll be in the league for 15 years as a backup. And he'll be a good backup because he's smart. He studies. He'll be ready to play. He's a tough guy. He's a winner kind of guy. But he gets exposed. The more that he's going to play, the more that he'll get exposed. But you've got Pickett that year, Malik Willis, who I think is a backup in Green Bay, maybe, right? I was watching a game the other night. Desmond Ridder somehow got into the game. I forget what game we were watching, but Desmond Ridder got into it. And I'm like, well, boy, so, and then you had Matt Corral. I don't even think he's in the league anymore. That quarterback class was pretty bad. I'm looking at this quarterback class, and I'm thinking, you know what, if Cam Ward doesn't pan out and Shedeur Sanders doesn't pan out, boy, this could be a class that's very similar to that one. And I think that, that's why if you're the Steelers, I understand why people would connect them with Aaron Rodgers. Part of it is because the Steelers do things like they don't want to have a losing season, ever. They don't want to have they don't want to have a losing season. So if they don't want to have a losing season, then guess what? At the end of the day, they're going to try and go out and find a patchwork quarterback again, like they did this year. But if you're going to do that, just see if Russell Wilson will sign for another, 1-year deal with you. Sign him and Fields. But again, if you sign Russell Wilson, Justin Fields is going to look to go somewhere where he can actually compete to be the starter. Because I don't think he wants to be the backup again. I think that's the biggest thing about it. You don't want to be a backup again. And that's not to say there's going to be a lot of opportunities and places for him to start. But I do think what that does mean is he will have, some opportunities to go places where, well, like for instance, it might be a place where there's a rookie that they're going to bring in, or a place where there is a guy that's probably they want to challenge for the starting job. There might be a place like that for him. So that's the biggest thing here. The Aaron Rodgers situation with the Steelers. I always say this, and just remember this. Remember that I told you this. Again, I've been in media for 30 years. Somehow, some way, I've been in media for 30 years now. Okay. It amazes me when I say that, but I'm lying. What, 2025, 30 years. And here's what I'll tell you. You always follow the story from the standpoint of, okay, where is that coming from? And I guarantee you, Peter King is obviously very well plugged into around the league. He's got sources everywhere. I would be willing to bet someone told him, hey, the Steelers are probably going to look for a veteran quarterback again next year because they're not happy with Russell Wilson or because whatever. So that's why, oh boy, okay, Aaron Rodgers. I heard even, the other day somebody connecting the Steelers to Sam Darnold. I mean, not sure why the Vikings wouldn't go. Of course, watching him the other night, maybe they figure they got enough. They got every ounce they could get out of him, and he's going to revert to being the Sam Darnold we've known. But my point is, it's just one of those things where if they're talking about the Steelers, it means that someone from the Steelers organization or some source that these national guys have has let it out that the Steelers are not likely to sign Russell Wilson again. That's basically what it means. And again, I think it's a great hypothetical conversation. But one of the things that I always say, okay, what happens if they win the next 4 games? What happens if Russell Wilson finds the fountain of youth, becomes Russell Wilson of, Seattle of 7, 8, 9 years, or whatever it was, 7 years ago? They find then what? All of these conversations change. So I think it's important to note that because, again, I think when you look at the season, one of the things about the season is it's been like up and then down and up and down. And I'll go this way with you. Was it last year or the year before? The Steelers started out 2-6. I think it was 2 years ago. They started out maybe 2-6, and then ended up, rallying all the way back to 9-8, and maybe even got to the playoffs or had an opportunity to get back to the playoffs, whatever it was. I mean, it's amazing how the narrative there is, oh, man, Mike Tomlin is a genius. He's able to keep this team together and fight through this all, and they got him and they figured it out, and there was a non-losing season, and this is his genius. Well, how is that any different than this year? Other than the fact that the playing as one of the worst teams in football for a while was at the end of the season instead of the beginning. Honestly, there's no difference. Do you want to know why? Because you got to play 17 games. And I think sometimes we go way overboard, the order of the games and, when they win and when they lose. And, oh, boy, look what a great job he did to keep them together, to keep them. Well, I mean, here we all knew that the second half of the season was going to be difficult. We also knew that this team probably wasn't a 14-win team or a 13-win team or whatever it looked like they were going to be when they were whatever. What were they early in the season, like 7-1 or 7-2 or something like that, whatever they were. We knew they weren't going to be a 14-win team. Do you want to know why? Because they're not a 14-win team. Interestingly enough, what would have happened if you took some of the garbage teams? And here's what I'm going to tell you. When it comes to your schedule, right, and the way that it goes and the way that it falls and everything else, if you look at the Steelers and what they did and what they played, okay, and the way they played this year, what happens if the Denver game and the San Diego, the Denver game and the Chargers game, what happens if those 2 games would have taken place later in the season, as opposed to some of the games they played late in the season or, midway through the season? Obviously, it could have changed a lot because the Steelers were very lucky to get those 2 teams when they got them. They got them early on. So that to me is what that is, I think, important to remember. Sometimes, we get so caught up in the ups and the downs and this and that and the other thing. Losing to Cincinnati is a terrible look at the end of the year, but are we really surprised they lost to the Chiefs and then at Philadelphia and at Baltimore? Probably not. Just so happens they all were, right next to each other. If there would have been, didn't they play they might have played the Jets this year. I think they did. So if they'd have played the Jets in one of those weeks, one of those games against the Browns in one of those weeks, I don't know. Would it really change what we think? I was listening to Ben Roethlisberger's podcast the other day, and one thing that he said is, hey, I mean, the Steelers are obviously going into the playoffs playing poorly. The Ravens are going into the playoffs playing really well. And he went, and pointed out that a lot of people want to draw on that Steelers team that was a 2005, his first Super Bowl championship, was it 2005? And he's like, one of the things that you forget about that team is that they needed to win their last 4 or 5 games, maybe. I think it was 5, but obviously down the stretch, they had to win their final 4 games just to get to the playoffs. So they had a bunch of momentum, but they were playing really good football as they were going down the stretch. And it carried over into the playoffs. It wasn't like they, just sort of limped into the playoffs and then all of a sudden found something and decided, then they went out and went crazy, right? That's not what happened. And so when you look at that again, and this goes back to what we talked about yesterday, yeah, there's probably a good reason why a number of people would say or suggest that, hey, the Steelers are likely not to win this weekend because they're playing the Ravens, who are playing really good football right now. They're in Baltimore. They haven't played well in a month, all of those kind of things. And so, but I would be careful to start the narratives about anything, about the coach, about the quarterback, about the season until after Saturday's game. If they lose Saturday, then we've got a lot to talk about, don't we? And I think that's the key to me, is that, sometimes we craft together these narratives before everything is done. And so, if you look at it from that perspective, before everything is done, it's easy to have these hypothetical conversations about the quarterback position, about what they should do going forward, about, I'll predict this. And I'll wait till Friday's show before I actually make my predictions for the NFL and everything else. But I'll predict this, okay? If the Steelers lose, one of the coordinators will go because they have to make some change. And one of the quarterbacks are going to go. And it probably is going to be Russell Wilson. That's the only prediction I'll make if they lose. If they win, all bets are off. If they win, I honestly think it's going to be real interesting to see what happens then. Because, again, here's the thing. If they win, it puts a bow on a season, makes it a successful season. Even if they go to Kansas City and get smoked, which they would, you won in Baltimore. That's a pretty good playoff win. And even though I could make the argument it's a better matchup for the Steelers because they know the Ravens and play them so much and they've beaten them so many times and they're confident against them, it's a better matchup than the Texans would be. Perception-wise, beating the Ravens is a lot better than beating the Texans. So if they beat the Ravens, get to the next game against the Chiefs, I don't know that there's really much more you can actually expect from this team. But if they lose, boy, it calls into question a whole lot of different things. It does. It calls into question a lot of things about the future. But again, people like to react negatively, positively, whatever. They love to react to these national guys when they come up with these stories and they're making up things or all this other stuff. What happens and what you forget is that these stories come from sources of some degree of reputable. And so it's not like he's just pulling this out of the air. He could be pulling the Aaron Rodgers piece out of the air because, obviously I don't know that anyone in the Steelers organization would say, yeah, we're interested in Aaron Rodgers. But what I mean is he wouldn't be talking about the Steelers going out and getting a veteran quarterback if he wasn't confident on some level that the Steelers were going to be a team that was going to be in the market for a quarterback. Game's always on at Archie's, by the way. Get down to Archie's on Carson Street. Archie's, home of 80-cent wings, by the way. Get down there in about an hour. Go see Pitt basketball play. At 7, they play a big game against Duke. All the playoff games all weekend long, the college football playoff games. Archie has them all. Archie's got the best wings in Pittsburgh. 80 cents Monday through Thursday. You can also eat the Paul Zeise grilled cheese sandwich. So get down to Archie's on Carson Street. When you get down there, tell them that Paul Zeise sent you. So when I look at, for instance, this game against the Ravens, one of the things I was trying to really break down is the Steelers' ability to stop Lamar Jackson. And while nobody seems to be able to really stop Lamar Jackson, the Steelers have done as well of a job on him as just about anybody. And one of the things that's very interesting is, what's the weather going to be like? Is it going to be a slick field? If it's going to be a slick field, that could be bad for Lamar Jackson's ability to cut and make guys miss and all that other stuff. But that's going to be one of the keys. The other important key is going to be the Steelers' ability to score touchdowns early in the game. If we're talking about the Steelers down 14-3 early, that's bad. If we're talking about the Steelers up 14-3, now all of a sudden they can dictate some things with their defense. In their offense, they can do a lot of things to try and possess the ball and protect. But if they get into a game where they got to chase the Ravens and try and match score for score, it's over. They're not beating the Ravens in that kind of game. So we'll see what happens with that. We can talk more and more about that as we go through it. But again, if you're talking about quarterback for next year and your plan is, well, maybe they can trade up to go get a quarterback, it just doesn't. There just isn't really anyone that interests me all that much that they would trade up for it. The two guys that are on top of everyone board is Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders. I think there's probably a little bit of a red flag with both of them. On to the college football playoff. And I find it amazing to me that if you look at the games and the teams that are left, I would say Penn State is probably the second best team left. I mean, it's incredible if you think about it. But Notre Dame is 2.5-point favorite over Penn State. Now, Notre Dame's defense is really good, but so is Penn State's. Penn State is also really good against the run. I'm hearing all these narratives about how, Notre Dame is going to do this or they're going to do that. I think Notre Dame's quarterback stinks. I think Penn State is really good against the run. And I think that if that's the case, they're going to have an opportunity to go down the field and make a couple of big plays and maybe win the game. I don't think it's going to take a ton of points to win the game. I know people that they really believe that, that in some world that Penn State, is, they haven't beaten anybody. They're, this, they're that. I'm going to tell you this much right now. Penn State is actually really good. They're a really, really good team. It's one of their better teams that they've had in a long, long time, to be honest. And I think one of the things about it is because they, the teams that they've beaten haven't been as good as maybe some people want them to be. I think people are sleeping on Penn State. I said this before. I expect Penn State to win this game. And I'm going to tell you this much right now. I expect Penn State to win against Notre Dame by 10 or more. I think Ohio State probably is going to win by, 14 or more but against Texas. But the Penn State-Notre Dame game, I think everybody has this idea that it's going to be this really close, tight game. It will not shock me at all if we're talking about Penn State winning the game, something like 23-10, honestly. And so it's going to be an interesting thing. In general, the college football playoff has stunk. The Arizona State-Texas game was good. The rest of them were all pretty bad. They just weren't really all that interesting. And I think that part of it is because they seeded it poorly. They'll get that right next year. I'll tell you one other thing they should do. They should just basically say, screw it, add 4 more teams, That way, all 8 of the top seeds, that means you have 16 in the field. That means all 8 of the top seeds get an extra home game, which is really what this is all about, revenue, right? I mean, come on. So, to me, you're one of the top 4 seeds and you get a bye, but you don't get a home game. That doesn't make sense to me. I say put 16 in, seed them 1 through 16. I don't care what conference they're from, who won a conference, who didn't, all that other stuff. And to be honest, I would say that if you do it that way, you know what? You'll get better matchups in the first and the second and the third round. And then, of course, the Final Four is what it is. But, I think we've got a pretty good group of teams. Texas, to me, is the weakest of the 4 teams. I'm not in love with their quarterback. I think their defense is really good. I'm not in love with their quarterback. I'm not in love really with their offense at all. Ohio State, if they play their A game twice, which we've seen they don't always do, but if they play their A game twice, Ohio State will win this thing. They are the best team. Just the way it is. It's just the way it is. Anyway, we will do this again tomorrow, and then again Thursday, and then again Friday, and we will get it all going. It's just one of those things where we've got to continue to build up to the game. We've got a lot of things we're going to think about and talk about. We'll do all that, and we'll do it again when it comes around again tomorrow. Until then, however, thank you for listening and for joining in, and let's continue to do this every single day.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.